The format and draw for the 2022 Canadian Championship have finally been revealed, and it's the same as it has been the past few seasons with a little bit of an edit, as we are now fully confirmed, even in a normal season, having one-legged ties. This year's Canadian Championship will start in early May and run through July, with the 2022 Canadian Championship being crowned in July, in midsummer, which is just perfect for this tournament. And I think this tournament always succeeded at its best, and was always at its best when it was kind of a summer only tournament. And honestly, in Canada, it makes sense that you have your biggest, widest tournament real quick, all just in the summer. Now, before I get into my predictions, I just want to talk about the formatting real quick, and the controversial part of the formatting, which is the one-legged draws. Now, of course, there is some pushback about the one-legged draws from fans, as it means that not every team gets a chance to host. It means that some smaller teams have to go into big MLS stadiums, and that's it. That's their only chance they get. And especially in the case of an MLS team versus a CPL team, if the CPL team isn't drawn as the host, then the CPL team doesn't get the pleasure of hosting a Major League Soccer club. The two-leg tie Canadian Championship format made sense in the past when there were literally 5 teams competing for the Canadian Championship, pre-CPL, pre-League One Ontario and PSLQ teams getting into the Canadian Championship, when it was literally just Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, and Edmonton. The two-leg draws made sense because obviously the 3 MLS teams all got byes into the semifinals, so literally every single time, if it was a one-leg draw, you'd only have each team playing 2 games, and to have a tournament and crown a champion that gets to go to the CONCACAF Champions League based off of 2 games, it's kind of ridiculous. So the two-legged draws made sense, that there were 4 games and you had to be the better team home and away, and there wasn't just like, oh, this team got lucky and drew home both times and so they automatically win. However, now when you have a Canadian Championship that has 13 teams with the CPL's 8 teams added on, we're in a situation where we have a preliminary round, a quarterfinal, a semifinal, and a final, and by the quarterfinal all teams are in, and it really isn't impossible at all for a team that starts in the preliminary round to make it all the way to the final. And in that case, you'd have a team in a two-legged format having to play 8 games to get to the final. And in the Canadian soccer season, especially for the CPL teams, 8 extra games is a lot, and honestly is a little too much to ask, especially considering that the team in the best position to do that would also have a CONCACAF League run, and then things just get messy. There's way too many games there. And moving forward, the Canadian Championship is going to keep expanding. Next season, we're going to most likely have Vancouver added in. We're probably going to have the League One BC champions added in. So next season, we're going to be going up to 15 teams. I'd imagine they do similar preliminary round and then have one team, the winner of the previous year, going to bye to the second round. But then we're going to be up to 15 teams, and then CPL's already talking about more expansion, obviously. Saskatoon, no one really knows what's going on there, but they're coming. Windsor, David Klaniken's trying to get a team there. There may or may not in the future be more League One type leagues in like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the Maritimes, so on. Then there's whatever the Thunder Bay Chill, FC Manitoba, and the Calgary Foothills are doing, and they're talking about making a second-tier Canadian league, so they could also be expanding it. And if the Canadian Championship keeps expanding, the two-leg ties just aren't viable. Like literally, you add one more round to the Canadian Championship prior to this one, you add 4 more teams to the Canadian Championship, and you have to add an extra round. The ability to do the two-leg ties is pretty much dead at that point. So I think, well, right now with the current number of teams, the two-leg ties is still technically viable. I think this is, get people used to it for the future, get it ready, and I think the one-leg ties moving forward is the way to go. So now, of course, it's time to talk predictions, and this is the bracket for the 2022 Canadian Championship. Team on top hosts, we have Cavalry hosting Edmonton, Vancouver hosting Valor, Ottawa hosting York, Guelph hosting Halifax. That's a fun one, with the League One Ontario champions Guelph getting to host a CPL squad, and Forge hosting the first not Blainville team to represent the PLSQ in this tournament, Mont-Royal. Outremont, and with byes to the second round, we have Pacific FC, who will be hosting the winner of Ottawa and York, Toronto, who will be going away to the winners of Guelph and Halifax, and Montreal, who will be hosting the winners of Forge and CS Mont-Royal. So here are my predictions. Cavalry, Edmonton. Cavalry, Edmonton. I think you're going to notice that this video is going to give you a bit of a preview to my future CPL predictions video. Cavalry, solid still in CPL. They haven't really blown things up too much. They lost some players, brought in some players. FC Edmonton is a complete ownerless mess right now. They've thrown everything of value off the franchise. They've just loaned a bunch of players in from other CPL teams. FC Edmonton is the weakest team in the CPL right now, probably by a wide margin in my opinion, so I think Cavalry is easily going to take this matchup. Next up we have Vancouver Whitecaps and Winnipeg's Valor FC. So, who will be the CPL team that knocks out the Whitecaps this year? I think that the frontrunners to knock out the Whitecaps are probably Cavalry, Pacific, or Forge, because they've all done it before, although Forge is on the other side of the bracket, so that's less likely. The Whitecaps should be able to get through Valor, although last year I said the Whitecaps should be able to get through Pacific. However, I think that this Valor team isn't as good as last year's Pacific team, and this Whitecaps team is better than last year's Whitecaps team by a little bit, so I'm going to pick the Whitecaps to move on through this season. Next up, Ottawa versus York. This is probably the biggest toss-up in this first round of the Canadian Championship. Ottawa has made some huge moves this season, brought in a lot of quality players. York has stayed pretty consistent with what they had last season, but what they had last season was a very good young team, and you can tell that with the development that they're seeing, they're going to be even better this year. This game is probably going to be the best game of the first round in my opinion, and while I like what York's building, I also really like what Ottawa's building. I actually am rating Ottawa quite highly this year. I think Atleti Ottawa is going to get their first ever Canadian Championship victory and move past York United. Guelph hosting Halifax. So, Guelph, coming off their first season ever in League 1 Ontario last year, was incredible, honestly. They were fantastic in League 1 Ontario. A little bit of CPL experience on that squad over guys who really weren't quite great to stick around in the CPL. Halifax, high-flying offensive team in the CPL. The addition of Aiden Daniels makes their offense even stronger. Guelph hosting does throw a little bit of a wrench in where this game might go, but I think that Halifax is the strong favorites. The League 1 Ontario teams have always looked a notch below the CPL teams they face off against in the Canadian Championship, and last year Masters was pretty handily beaten by York. This Guelph team is probably better than that Masters team, but I still don't see them really having the strength to challenge Halifax that closely in this game. Halifax is my choice to go through. Similar thing with this matchup, Forge versus CS Mont-Royal Outremont. Forge pushed Montreal to penalties last Canadian Championship. Mont-Royal Outremont is their first time in the Canadian Championship. The PLSQ teams have tended to fare slightly better than the League 1 Ontario teams in this tournament. However, on the road, Halifax hosting gives them really what should be enough of a push to guarantee that any chance of an upset here isn't going to happen. My choice to win this match is Forge. Moving on to the quarterfinals, Cavalry versus Whitecaps. The historic win in 2019 when Cavalry beat the Whitecaps, being the first ever CPL team to beat an MLS team in the Canadian Championship, was a major moment for the CPL, a major moment for Cavalry, and honestly this season I could see them doing it again. Now, the past 2 years, my predictions videos, I've always played it safe, and I've said the MLS teams are always the favorites to win, and yes, Whitecaps are definitely the favorites to win this match. However, the history in the Canadian Championship is of coming up short, especially of late. So I think going into this game, especially if Cavalry gets to host, this is 100% Cavalry's matchup. Even on the road, Cavalry has shown that they can do it in Vancouver before. I think that Cavalry is my choice to go through. I feel like they're going to be playing on a chip on their shoulder, especially after not making the CPL finals last year. And I think that they want to make a big splash in this year's Canadian Championship and get at least to the semifinals. Cavalry is my pick to win this match. Next up, we have Pacific versus Ottawa. Pacific has definitely had a bit of a fall off in their roster since last season. However, they are bringing in pieces slowly to amend for what they've lost. Ottawa has had a huge increase in talent on their roster from last year. However, I still don't think they are at the level of what Pacific is at, even with Pacific dropping a little bit and with Ottawa raising quite a bit. I think that Pacific still has a couple more moves left in them in this offseason. I mean, both of these teams probably have a few more moves left in them in this offseason, but I think Pacific has a few more bigger moves left in them in the offseason to really get the team close to what they were last year before losing Campbell, Hajabapur, McNaughton, and Chun. And also, this is Pacific's practice knockout tournament before they play through the last ever installment of the CONCACAF League, and you know they're not going to want to go out in the first round in that. So Pacific is my choice to move forward. Halifax versus Toronto. Now, for this matchup, Toronto would be going on the road to Halifax. We know in 2019, the Ottawa Fury beat the Halifax Wanderers, and it was really disappointing that TFC was going to TD Place in Ottawa instead of going to the Wanderers ground in Halifax, because honestly, I think Toronto FC at the Wanderers ground might be one of the greatest moments in Canadian soccer, really, to just from a fan perspective to see play out. I think that right there would just be like perfect to have Toronto FC go to that 6,000 capacity Wanderers ground, that tight, packed, loud area filled with just super faithful Wanderers fans. I think that would be an incredible atmosphere for a game, and I'm so excited that we have a high probability of that happening in this Canadian Championship. Also interesting to note for TFC is Insigne and potential other reinforcements that they're looking to sign from Italy are probably not coming until July, and this round would be happening in late May, and the semifinals would be happening in June. So TFC wouldn't have Insigne plus other summer signings until the finals. So that makes TFC's trek to the finals slightly more difficult. However, I think Toronto FC still should have the talent and abilities to get by any CPL team they play without Insigne or any other international signings. Schaffelberg last year in the Canadian Championship was absolutely excellent, and I think, especially against Halifax, if he gets a homecoming game in Halifax, he's going to be honestly the best player in the pitch in that match. So Toronto FC is my pick to go through. Montreal Forge, the rematch of last year's epic semi-final, which went to keepers in penalties. What a match that was at Tim Hortons Field. Montreal now will be hosting the rematch up against a Forge team that looks quite strong. They looked very good against Cruz Azul, especially considering that this was like very early preseason for Forge against Cruz Azul. Montreal, the defending champions, are significantly more talented on their lineup than Forge. Why am I saying this for Toronto and Montreal but not for Vancouver? Well, Toronto and Montreal don't have a history of blowing this tournament against the CPL teams. They have a history of, winning against them. I know Montreal not as good as Toronto because of that penalty shootout against Forge, but I think Montreal won't allow a penalty shootout like that to happen again, especially in front of their own fans. So Montreal is my pick to go through. Now, the way the bracket pans out, Cavalry Pacific one semifinal, Toronto Montreal another semifinal. We have to have a CPL team in the final of the Canadian Championship if the Whitecaps get knocked out, and that is honestly incredible. Cavalry Pacific's the defending CPL champion, is going to be again practicing for the CONCACAF League right about to start that tournament, I think, when this round gets going. Cavalry, they're good. They are good. They're good at knockout tournaments. However, last year in the playoffs, Pacific went to Calgary and won. Yes, it's not the same Pacific team. I think these two teams are very, very even this season, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, how they play out against each other in the CPL and in this tournament. I'm going to give the slight edge to Pacific. I think after their CPL performance last season, a Canadian Championship final run would just be like perfect for them, and because of that, I think it's a perfect run for Pacific. So I think that it is more likely to happen, and I also think that they are going to have a slight edge. They've already done it in Calgary. If they end up hosting, they'll have the home field advantage, and they've already proven they don't need it. So Pacific is my pick to move past Cavalry and move on to the finals of the Canadian Championship. And the other semifinal, the rematch of last year's final, Toronto versus Montreal. Toronto, what I said earlier, they're not going to have Insigne, they're not going to have any other summer acquisitions in time for this matchup, and I think against, Halifax, that didn't matter as much. Against Montreal, I think it is going to matter a little bit. I think we've seen in the first couple weeks of MLS that Toronto FC needs to sort some things out a little bit. Montreal already in the final 8 in the CONCACAF Champions League this year. I think with that tournament plus MLS, they'll just have had more time to figure things out and be able to play in a tough knockout match against Toronto in this position. And honestly, this one's going to be tough to call until we see a bit more MLS, see how Toronto FC settles in. But right now, where we are right now, 2 games into the MLS season, Montreal is my pick to win this game. And I think if this game was in July, I'd be saying Toronto FC was going to win it. But because it's in June, I think this game is going to Montreal. Stop saying these prediction videos are biased. I just put Montreal beating both Forge and Toronto FC. Those are my 2 teams, and Montreal is probably my least favorite team in Canadian soccer right now. So, yeah, don't say these videos are biased. Okay, Pacific versus Montreal. This would be a hell of a final, especially if it's at the Starlight Stadium in Victoria. Wow, that would be good and big enough for me to consider flying out there to go see it. Montreal versus Pacific, MLS team versus CPL team in the final. That would be absolutely incredible. The first time we've ever seen that. 2020 is a glorified friendly. This is the first time we'd ever see that. Pacific versus Montreal. Again, I like Pacific. It would be just perfect if they won this tournament, honestly. Like, with what they built last season. It would only be more perfect if they still had Pamadou as the coach, honestly. And I think that is a major detractor to the mythos of what they could do this season and in this tournament. I'm going to give the slight edge to Montreal. They are the defending champions of the last 2 proper Canadian championships. And honestly, despite, having issues at times in Major League Soccer, they've always sort of raised their level of performance for this tournament. And really, this is the tournament that I think CF Montreal or the Formal Impact perform their best in. So I think Montreal is going to probably be the best bet to win this tournament this season. And my pick to win the 2022 Canadian Championship is CF Montreal. So here you have it. Here's how I think the 2022 Canadian Championship is going to pan out. Last year of 13 teams before we get hopefully 15 next season. Probably at least 14 because League One BC is, if they don't get a spot, what the heck is happening? Let me know down below in the comments what you think is going to happen in this 2022 Canadian Championship, what you think of these predictions, and what you think of the one-legged format going forward for this tournament. As always, if you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.